welcome here to the home of Yanders Lights at Champion and Ferrari's biggest fan, as we are going to go here to the exclusive race reaction to round 13 of this 2026 FI Formula 1 World Championship. Well, I know it's technically only the 11th race, that you've seen, but hey, we've gotten a new team joining the ranks of the winners of this new 50% traditional 50% all-electric Formula 1 with Lando Norris, the reigning world champion, getting a victory that really should have been ours. So in this exclusive race reaction, we will talk about what exactly have happened, why we were not celebrating the victory as I was obviously racing concurrently, in the Belgian Grand Prix, and why we really need to tidy up obviously our strategies, but also, the approach from both the drivers, but also from the team in order to really challenge for the title, because it looks like we've got one main title contender, and that's George Russell. Well covered, but what do you do about that 19-year-old Italian teenager Andrea Antonelli, who always delivers? Well, would it be the 41-year-old, one of the oldest drivers on the grid, the 7-time Formula 1 world champion, Lewis Hamilton, who's gonna get the better of him? Well, we've seen a proper fight between them, and it was actually interesting that it was Lewis who made a mistake, and then it was Kimi, or Andreas, we really should call him by his proper name, who's shown more maturity. So yeah, definitely disappointing result, because we expected to win over here. I expected that we will be celebrating with a lovely fine-tuned Italian national anthem as we will go to the well-deserved summer break of the summer of 2026. Instead, definitely nothing is lost. Actually, this result, frankly speaking, if you look at, how many points we scored over here, we outscored Mercedes. So, that's good, but it's definitely opportunity missed, and we have to sometimes maximize, the result, especially for one driver, because having, both Leclerc and Hamilton kind of taking points of each other, when it's usually Antonelli who's, getting the points for Mercedes, can come very costly. Once the checkered flag falls at Abu Dhabi, or will it be Abu Dhabi, there are some changes, to the calendar. So we will, of course, talk about that extensively in the race introduction to the next round, which, as you can see on this lovely scarlet red Ferrari designed 3D calendar, or on the traditional 2D calendar, which will be Zandvoort, the penultimate, obviously, sprint race weekend of the season. But, going to Hungary, celebrating 40 years, obviously, of existence on the Formula 1 calendar. Once again, we saw, one of the issues that you have with Hungary, right, that it is mostly a strategic race, that it is really, really difficult to make the overtake unless a person makes a mistake, or unless the other driver just makes a crazy move and the defending driver simply lets him go, right? You've seen what happened between Hamilton and Verstappen. So over here, we will discuss all of that, and then we will take a look at how the race finished and what it means for the drivers and the Constructors' Championship. And then we will talk about how well we've done, because now obviously that concurrent season that we are playing, the round 13 was actually the Belgian Grand Prix. The Hungarian is coming up, but I can tell you, that Verstappen is a threat in both of the races. So, we really came undone in qualifying. We sported obviously, the upgrade, the rear wing, which definitely did give us lots of the speeds. It looked very promising on Fridays, but then on the Saturdays, some of the little but very costly mistakes crept in. Lewis Hamilton was in, planted it on pole position. Again, he would be the first 40-year-old since Michael Schumacher, who has also planted it on the Monaco pole, but then lost it due to the penalty from the previous race. Here, Norris beat him by 0.012 seconds. Lucky, that obviously, we went a little bit too early for the final run, and also Leclerc always being 2 tenths behind, mostly due to the fact that he is really not strong in the braking zones, which was magnified by the start of the race. So and that put us on a back foot. But then inexplicably, Hamilton blocked Piastri, who maybe wasn't really a threat, to him, maybe due to the miscommunication or due to the yellow flags brought out again by Verstappen, who were spinning into the final corner. And this is that unpredictability that you sometimes have, right? That, why would such a mistake happen? I mean, who's behind you. You look into the mirrors, Hamilton got a 3-place grid penalty. So did Antonelli, who apparently didn't live through the final corner, but you have to live through that anyways. So that was a very strange penalty. And again, Russell's very poor performance probably meant that, it was more like to make the championship more exciting, right? So as a result, you had Norris starting first, Leclerc second, great. We were supposed to start fourth with Hamilton, but due to that penalty, obviously by Antonelli, we dropped behind Verstappen, so we had to start fifth. According to the regulations, Antonelli had to start seventh, so that promoted, obviously Piastri and Verstappen 2 places to the second row. Then Russell obviously starting then next to Hamilton and in front of Antonelli. But yeah, it was wow. When the 5 red lights went out on a very, very hot summer 2026, mid-afternoon, I couldn't believe that we actually have gotten probably one of the worst starts of the season. It was like, it's such a long run-up that, I was fully expecting, that we would be, running like, 1-3, even 1-2, but Leclerc couldn't make it work. That side was dirty, obviously, the right-hand side, and he actually lost lots of positions. Hamilton actually got on Leclerc because he was so cautious on the brakes, that Leclerc dropped the position to Piastri, then let the inside open to Verstappen. That was a bit of a mistake from the future dad to be. By the way, congratulations, that's a great news, but hey, please focus on driving. He should have closed the door on that new dad, Verstappen, to make sure that he didn't get the inside. Hamilton did a great job on the outside. You could see, why he's got the 9 pole positions. I will be aiming for a 6th pole position, and the next round, so definitely stay tuned, if I will manage to do so. But you could see, right, that what happened there was, Hamilton, confident, really wanted to go for the title, overtook Leclerc, but critically couldn't get ahead of Verstappen, right? They all started on the mediums, but because we are Scarlet Red Ferrari, we started on the softs. That strategy would have worked if Leclerc went into the lead. Then Hamilton would have been probably right next to him, and if it would be 1-2, 1-3, then was the ideal situation. When we were 4th and 5th, we were kind of stuck there behind Red Bull. But because Piastri was significantly slower than Norris, actually, Norris was also kind of kept on the leash, so to speak, and he was complaining behind Piastri. But you can see, again, McLaren being led by the former Michael Schumacher's engineer Andrea Stella, they simply went for it and said, look, we cannot, make any changes over there, right, to the order, so it will be Piastri first for the pits, then Norris, who then decided to extend, that second stint, because basically what happened, was that Hamilton did a very, very early undercut, which made sense on the soft tires, but actually the tire degradation wasn't so severe. But then we went to the hard tires, which I don't think worked as well as the mediums, but actually hardly anybody used the mediums. So what happened was that, we were really hoping to undercut Verstappen and then go after the McLarens, and it did happen, a great job, but then of course, one of the teething issues that you have in Formula 1, which is that Red Bull also owns the Racing Bulls, and we got stuck behind the Racing Bulls, who were not going very fast. Hamilton pulled off some great move on the only rookie, Arvid Lindblad, going through that turn 5 right underneath, that water park, that was a great move, but then he caught Liam Lawson on the next lap, and then Verstappen just, dived down the inside, full lug, managed to, of course, keep it, on the track, but of course, block Hamilton and the apex, kind of his signature move, but it was only enabled by the fact that the Racing Bull was there. So, that was a big opportunity, and I think the race victory missed. At that point, it still looked like Hamilton, who had the ultimate pace, would go there. Leclerc started to kind of fade away, and it was the case of, okay, let's say, do the undercut. But now when we were behind Verstappen, we couldn't close down to the McLarens, which I believe we were definitely, capable of with Piastri, and then we could have executed another undercut, which we did on lap 31, stopping Hamilton for the second time. Again, going to the hard tires, and this time, there was no reaction from the front runners, and I believe, this was a pretty good strategy, but maybe just a one stop that Antonelli did, who then, basically has steadily put himself in a picture, would also work pretty well. But we did the same also with Leclerc and so on. And what happened, was that basically once, everybody stopped, right? We were closing down, on Piastri, but again, we were now behind the McLaren because we were behind the Red Bull, obviously. When we stopped for the first time, and we were behind another Red Bull of Hajar with Hamilton when he came out of the second stop. So the timing, again, maybe we play it too close, right? Because sometimes just maybe waiting one more lap until there is a bit more of a gap, this way you give yourself no margin. And if the pit stop is 2.6 seconds instead of 2.2 seconds, that can mean the difference, between gaining the position or not on the undercut. So that was not well executed, I have to say. But then, we were still, behind Piastri, who then almost got collected by former Ferrari driver Carlos Sainz. So a lot was happening, which enabled, Hamilton to close down, but that really opened the door to Norris to then stop and get ahead of both Hamilton and Piastri, and then off he went for a race lead, and of course then the race win, because he did have the pace and fresher tires. Piastri then retired with a suspected gearbox issue. McLaren said it was running through the turn 4, but it was probably because he got such a bag from Sainz. So that was great for us. We were second, but it triggered the virtual safety car. Norris stopped for the soft tires, with 13 laps to go, but so did we, both with Leclerc and obviously also with Hamilton. Antonelli at that point just stopped for the hard tires just a few laps prior, and what happened was that suddenly, we gave up second and third place, right, to what effectively suddenly was fourth and fifth, with Antonelli now chasing Verstappen and Hamilton being right behind Antonelli. That was a great shot, when actually they were both title contenders racing, there to the safety car line. And a big paradox of Formula 1 happened when actually Hamilton came out of the pits, right, and full power, and Antonelli had to go at a reduced power, right, because the car kind of, when you play it on a simulator like here with the Ferrari SF1000T and my Formula 1 racing simulator, the car cannot go any faster. Antonelli, because he's gotten there, just a marginal, maybe 0.2 seconds faster, then he was allowed to keep that third place. Otherwise, Hamilton on the soft tires, I think, would have been able to catch and pass Verstappen and at least finish second, where he at least deserved to be. But yeah, very unlucky, with the 2 pit stops, like here, always, behind the drivers, and that cost you a lot over here at Hungarian, because Norris won by, quarter of a minute, simply because, once he had the free, air, so to speak, the fresh air, he was not running in a dirty air, he was able to pull away, and that was a real pity. Great missed opportunity, but you could see when Hamilton was behind Antonelli, he tried to overtake, but even with a hard soft offset, they had the same tire life. You could see that you still cannot overtake, which is surprising that Hungarian has such a long contract, because it doesn't always produce great races in terms of the overtaking. But hey, again, I guess being technically the only race in Eastern Europe really helps them. So in the end, very disappointing. And of course, because Hamilton stopped under the virtual safety car, he really tried to attack, that pit lane, and broke the speed limit, and got a 5-second penalty, so that dropped him behind his teammate Leclerc. So in the end, this is how the race finished. So let's turn around this Scarlet Red Retina iMac over here and see exactly how the race panned out. So yeah, a big disappointment, for us, I have to say. We definitely expected more, but it's Lando Norris, his first, maybe only victory of the season. Obviously, the McLaren is upgraded, but our upgrades are coming up, of course, for the Zandvoort. Second, then Max Verstappen, very lucky, because obviously if Piastri wouldn't retire and you wouldn't have, the shenanigans, with the safety car, he would be on for P5. Antonelli did a great job over here, finishing third ahead of his both main title rivals. So again, proving that he will be a worthy champion. Sometimes it feels like, that we prefer to win Antonelli in a Mercedes, not Hamilton in a Ferrari, because he would break the Michael Schumacher's record. And I'm sure that's actually on the back of a lot of real, true, loyal Ferrari fans, including me. So for Charles Leclerc, a mediocre race, from second on the grid to the fourth. That's not good enough, but again, big congratulations, because now we learned the happy news that he will be a dad. That's great, but again, he has to up his pace, because Hamilton, fifth, 10 points, this was great opportunity for Lewis to win, but I think in Zandvoort we will be strong, and of course also in Italy, Azerbaijan, Singapore, I think this will make or break the season, or maybe some new Grand Prix coming up, because you probably heard that the Malaysian Grand Prix at Sepang will make the return, and we are always run very well there, so that will be interesting. We will have to talk about it, because it was just announced, but yeah, I'm a little bit kind of like split. Should we do, what the F1 will be doing, but yeah, this is what will be happening. 6 Isaac Hajar for Red Bull, mostly his final corner, like the line he's taken is always wrong. you can tell that he's only racing for the second year in Formula One, and that's why he finished so far behind, scoring 8 points. But again, he was instrumental in slowing down a lot of us, including the leaders McLaren. So Red Bull always is playing such games, but you can see it's actually costing them massively in a Constructors' Championship. 7, George Russell. So why Russell wasn't even in the picture? Because he bogged down. And it was interesting what Antonelli said, that he probably lost the boost. That normally you have the boost, right? You have the overtake and the boost, and if you lose the boost at the start, that also, doesn't help you to get off the line. So Antonelli, obviously being a Mercedes driver, he knows what's wrong. So Russell dropped down to 16, recovered to 7. But yeah, looks like his title chances are well and truly over, and he's behind Hamilton. So hey, that Mercedes is a fragile car, and if the McLarens or even the Red Bulls could be between us and them, this could be a hell of a second half of the season. 8th is then Liam Lawson. We are unhappy with him because, again, I believe he cost Hamilton second place in this race. He scored 4 points. 9, Nico Hülkenberg did a great job for Audi, scoring 2 points. Long time coming, and he delivered. He will be happy going into the summer break. So the 19th driver, I believe, yes, 2 score points this season, and 10, Arvid Lindblad, who's gotten 1 point. It's at 1 point, that big fight between Lindblad, Lawson, the 2 Racing Bulls, and the Hülkenberg, even kept the leaders behind. So this is what it means for the 2026 FIA Formula One World Championship. So Andrea Kimi Antonelli is leading with 219 points ahead of Lewis Hamilton, who has 160 points, a full 50 points behind. Can you believe that? If Zandvoort wasn't sprint, that would mean that Antonelli would be guaranteed to lead the championship after the checkered flag falls at the end of the Monza Grand Prix. So the Italians, we can probably say it, unless Antonelli retires, from lots of the races and Hamilton wins them all, he will be leading. And actually, because George Russell has 160 points, he will be ahead of his teammate George Russell by the time, we leave Europe this year. Quite incredible that he has such a lead. Charles Leclerc is 4th for Scuderia Ferrari, 138 points. Again, still 31 points behind Hamilton, and on the showing of today, doesn't look like he's the driver that could break, the almost 20-year wait for the title. Since 2007, we haven't won. There was Kimi Raikkonen, another Kimi driving Ferrari, right? Will there be the Kimi driving the Ferrari? Maybe not next year, but in 2028? Definitely do let me know. So Lando Norris, the reigning world champion for McLaren, is still 5th, 128 points now. 6, Max Verstappen, Red Bull, 109 points. Oscar Piastri is 7 for McLaren, 92 points. 8, Isaac Hadjar, Red Bull, 68 points. 9 is Liam Lawson, Racing Bulls, 43 points. 10, Pierre Gasly, Alpine, 42 points. They were pretty much anonymous. 11 is then Arvid Lindblad, Racing Bulls, 23 points, doing great job there as a rookie. 12 is Franco Colapinto, Alpine, 19 points. 13, Oliver Bergman has 18 points. 14 is Gabriel Bortoleto, Audi, 10 points. 15 is Carlos Sainz, Williams, 6 points. Big villain, almost took out Piastri, who was leading. That doesn't bode well for Sainz. Obviously, he will definitely get a lot of hate for that, but he should be more focused, because Williams, is massively falling behind. 16, Alexander Albon, Williams, 5 points. 17 is then Esteban Ocon, has 3 points. 18, Nico Hülkenberg, Audi, 2 points. Jumps 19, Fernando Alonso, Aston Martin, who's got 1 point, but probably the best result of the season, and really finishing 14 for Aston Martin. And you can see one upgrade, because McLaren have brought the upgrades. They were nowhere in Belgium, 15, 25 points behind the race leaders. Suddenly they are 15 points ahead. So this is a great thing about the F1, right? Like a couple of upgrades, and all of a sudden, you can gain 3, 5 tenths, and all of a sudden you are the team to beat, and suddenly Aston Martin has jumped both Cadillac and Williams, I guess, in the pecking order. 28 is then now Lance Stroll for Aston Martin, 0 points, because obviously, he's now finished higher than, for example, the 21st. Valtteri Bottas of Cadillac, 0 points, and 22nd, Sergio Perez of Cadillac, 0 points. So yeah, this is how the driver's table looks like. For the constructor's table for the 2026 2026 FIA Formula 1 World Championship, Mercedes is leading with 379 points, but we are there on 307 points, 72 points behind. Definitely everything to play for, especially with Russell's really poor run of form. And now if Mercedes can be easily beaten by us or the orange McLarens who are on 220 points, definitely that, we can overcome, that's less than obviously 2-1-2. So after the Italian Grand Prix, we could, if the stars would align, very, very luckily be leading the Constructors' Championship. Red Bull is 4th on 177 points, 5th Racing Bull 66 points, 6th Alpine 61 points, 7 Haas 21 points, 8 Audi led by the former team boss from Scuderia Ferrari, obviously Binotto, on now 12 points, jumping Williams who are 9th, 11 points, not looking good for James Vowles there, 10 Aston Martin 1 point, improved their chances of maybe scoring more than 1 point this season, 11 Cadillac 0 points. So yeah, this is pretty much how it looks like. And yeah, again, I'm buoyed by the fact that we are getting closer, to Mercedes-Benz. But in terms of the Drivers' Championship, this is another great opportunity that came begging. And of course, Norris's win, it's a surprising one, frankly speaking, but, we believe it could be the only one of the season. We will see again what will happen, for the rest of the season. So I hope you enjoyed the reaction. I think with a better start, better qualifying, and definitely better strategy, and simply, really executing that very, very powerful undercut, we could have and should have been on a top step over the podium. I believe, Hamilton, Norris, and Leclerc, that would have been, probably a true indication who was the fastest over here in the race. It wasn't to be, but it was to be for me in the Belgium Grand Prix. So I hope you enjoyed it. The sprint was crazy for me, because obviously I got hit by Verstappen, who was kind of hit by Piastri. Piastri was the male culprit. That's why he deserved to retire. But man, my angel Amy was obviously watching the race live, and that was really disappointing. But you could see you never give up. I went for it, scored P3, leading the sprint championship by a point from this guy Norris. But then I absolutely dominated the Belgium Grand Prix, and I've also gotten that sprint pole. Again, I didn't get that Belgium, pole position that often eludes me, but again, I'm so happy to win for the 4th time, to getting very close to Michael Schumacher's record of 7 wins and that iconic track. And it's probably my strongest track of the season, but we've taken a very important step towards the championship, because we went from 19 points behind and we doubled, because even though obviously I had a crash with my title rival Verstappen, he didn't get any points from the sprint. I've gotten 6. He screwed up that qualifying, so he started in the last point, but I delivered a fantastic lap at the end of the Q1 to get out from the last position to almost the first, and then obviously qualified second only because Hamilton obviously was able to find bit more pace on that track that was getting ever so wetter, and then I overtook him with a fantastic move into Blanchi mode. So I'm very, very excited for the rest of the season. We were leading by 19 points, increased it to 25 after sprint, now 38, so it's looking really good. And now I think for the first time we can probably see the light at the end of the tunnel, so we will go now racing in Hungary, obviously, where we've always been on a pole position, where we've set some, have done some amazing races to extend the lead of the championship as we chasing that elusive 5th Formula 1 World Drivers' Championship for Scuderia Ferrari. So I hope you guys are enjoying the races and the reactions. But now we would obviously like to wish you enjoy a wonderful summer 2026. We won't be racing until pretty much the end of the August. And guys, enjoy the beautiful sunny weather. Man, I'm so hot. I can't wait to jump into the swimming pool. So I can see that water park, is still open there. And the sun, doesn't set until 10 p.m. So everybody, let's jump into it, because